Usually when we talk about buying groceries, there's this unspoken expectation of permanence.
Oh, absolutely. It just runs like clockwork.
Right. You walk into the produce section and like the misting machines are spraying the crisp romaine lettuce. The apples are stacked in these perfect little pyramids.
Yeah, and those brightly lit shelves just seem to stretch on forever.
Exactly. And we take it entirely for granted. But then, we look at what happened this past March of 2026.
Oh, yeah, the freeze.
Right? That sudden, completely unseasonal late winter freeze. Just a severe weather anomaly that swept through the major agricultural valleys out of nowhere.
And in a matter of days, that whole illusion of permanence just shattered.
Completely. Commercial agricultural supply chains ground to an absolute halt. You walked into a store and that sprawling fresh produce section was just, well, empty space.
Yeah, that event was a really stark physical demonstration of fragility. It exposed the extreme geographical vulnerability of modern centralized agriculture.
It really did.
Because when our food supply is anchored to these massive, immobile tracts of land, a single, unpredictable weather event can just cut off millions of people from fresh food.
It was a massive wake-up call for a lot of people. And honestly, that vulnerability is exactly why we're here today. So welcome back to the latest episode of Preparing for the Collapse Radio. We're so glad you're joining us again.
It's a great topic today.
It really is. And before we get into the mechanics of it, I need to tell you, if you think long-term about preparedness, this podcast is for you. So make sure you're subscribed.
Definitely, because today we're analyzing an incredibly empowering solution to that fragile supply chain you just mentioned.
Right, we're breaking down a framework for growing your own food, building self-reliance, even if you have absolutely zero land.
Which sounds impossible to a lot of people. But our source text for this conversation is a fascinating article titled The Nomad's Garden: Growing Food in Portable or Limited Spaces. And it's written by author Spiritwalker.
Yeah, and I want to add a quick point of clarity before we jump in. We're exploring Spiritwalker's frameworks today to see what mechanical and biological lessons we can extract about self-sufficiency.
Right, the practical application.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We aren't here to endorse a specific lifestyle or political worldview or anything like that. We're just impartially breaking down the highly practical engineering of what he's proposing.
And what he's proposing is essentially open source, decoupled infrastructure.
I love that phrase, decoupled infrastructure.
It's a perfect way to frame it. Spiritwalker, or Spirit, as he's known to his readers, he completely dismantles the foundational myth of modern gardening.
Which is that you need acres of fenced-in land and perfectly tilled soil.
Right. There's this pervasive assumption that you need that. But Spirit points out that this monolithic approach is actually a very recent industrialized concept.
Huh?
Yeah, if you look at human history, people have always grown food wherever they lived, on rooftops, in enclosed courtyards, or just right beside their tiny dwellings.
So if we are, decoupling our food from a fixed plot of land, the container basically becomes the new ecosystem.
Exactly. The container replaces the earth. And Spirit details these incredibly practical alternatives to traditional land. We aren't talking about expensive raised beds here.
What are we talking about then?
He suggests 5-gallon buckets, large plastic storage tubs, old coolers.
Wait, old coolers like for camping?
Yeah, old coolers or even simple crates lined with landscape fabric. Basically, if it holds soil and you can poke a drainage hole in it, it works. But he also highly recommends fabric grow bags, which actually offer a pretty fascinating biological advantage.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up the biology.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I have to challenge the premise here a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
If we're completely severing a plant from the Earth's natural ecosystem and dumping it into a plastic tub or a fabric bag, are we just creating an incredibly fragile, high-maintenance pet?
That's a common fear, yeah.
How does taking a plant out of the ground actually work in practice for someone constantly on the move?
Well, it works through adaptation. Think about what happens in a traditional garden. Modern agriculture relies on forcing the environment to adapt to the plant.
Right, with massive irrigation and chemical input.
Exactly. But nomadic gardening flips that entirely. You are adapting the plant to the environment. The fabric grow bags Spirit recommends are a perfect example of this.
I hope so.
So, in a hard plastic bucket, when a root reaches the edge, it circles around and strangles itself. It becomes root-bound.
Yeah, I've seen that when I buy plants from a nursery.
Right. But in a breathable fabric bag, when the root hits the air at the edge of the fabric, the tip naturally dries out and dies.
Oh, wait. So it just stops growing outward?
Yes. It's a process called air pruning. Because the main root stops, the plant is forced to grow dozens of secondary branching roots back inside the soil mass.
Wow.
So you end up with this vastly denser, far more efficient root system.
That is incredible. So the container is actually optimizing the root structure. But okay, I'm looking at the spatial limitations here.
Very significant, yeah.
Right. Logically, if I only have a few 5-gallon buckets or, fabric bags sitting outside a converted van or on a tiny concrete balcony, I'm dealing with severe constraints.
You're not planting a cornfield, that's for sure.
Exactly. I clearly cannot grow a pumpkin or a stalk of corn. The caloric return on investment just isn't there for the space it takes up.
And that's exactly why the math dictates your crop selection entirely. Because space is at an absolute premium, Spiritwalker enforces a really strict rule.
Which is?
You must focus exclusively on high-value crops. Every single plant in a Nomad's garden must earn its keep.
By providing the most food per container, I assume?
Yes, the highest density of nutrition or the most continuous yield per square inch.
Ah, okay. So we're looking for things that keep giving, rather than just one single massive harvest at the very end of the season.
Precisely. Spirit's top recommendations prioritize this continuous yield. He advocates heavily for cherry tomatoes, for instance.
Oh, because they produce fruit all season long from a single stem?
Right. Peppers are another really great option, but leafy greens are kind of the backbone of this system, specifically lettuce, spinach, and kale.
Kale makes a lot of sense. It's essentially a cut-and-come-again crop, right?
Exactly. You can harvest the outer leaves for months, and the core just keeps generating new food.
Yeah, and radishes and green onions make a lot of sense too, just based on how incredibly fast they grow.
Oh, absolutely.
You can cycle through multiple harvests in the time it takes to grow one traditional crop.
Yeah, and herbs are the final crucial component here. Basil, thyme, oregano, parsley.
Because they take up almost zero space.
Right, but their impact on the palatability of your stored food is massive. A little
Right.
bit of fresh oregano changes a whole meal.
It really does. And, maximizing the value of what you have is a recurring theme in his work.
Definitely.
For those of you listening who want to explore more about that broader philosophy of off-grid living, survival, and homesteading, Spiritwalker's Forgotten Wisdom blog is the source for a lot of these concepts.
It's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, for example, he applies that exact same high ROI mindset to things like building a one-year prepper pantry or brewing what he calls the master tonic for an off-grid apothecary. It's all about extracting maximum utility from minimal resources.
And that utility is tested most intensely when we look at the physical geometry of living in a small space.
Right. Because even if we select the perfect high-value crops, if you live in a tiny home or an RV, floor space is measured in inches.
Yeah, it vanishes quickly.
You put 5 buckets on the ground, and suddenly you can't open your front door.
Yep.
So how do we beat the physical geometry of a small footprint?
Well, you change your axis. Spiritwalker's rule here is simple, but really profound. Vertical space is your friend.
Okay, so growing up instead of out.
Exactly. If you only calculate the square footage of your floor or your patio, you are missing the vast majority of your usable growing space. Nomadic gardens just have to be designed to grow upward.
We have to stop thinking in 2D and start thinking in 3D.
It's the exact same logic you apply to the inside of a tiny home, right? You use vertical space for shelving and storage.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So your garden needs to utilize the vertical light profile. Spear explains the mechanics of using trellises, balcony rails, ladder shelves, even hanging baskets.
Oh, for climbing plants.
Right. The key is focusing on climbing plants like beans, cucumbers, and peas.
Because they have those tiny tendrils that literally pull them up toward the sun.
Yes, and biologically, climbing plants have evolved to spend very little energy building thick, supportive trunks.
Oh, interesting.
Instead, they just use existing structures to climb, which means they can funnel all that saved energy into producing massive yields.
That's a great biological hack.
It is. They require almost zero ground space, just the footprint of a single small pot, but they maximize photosynthesis by creating a vertical wall of leaves.
Like a living green wall. I love that visual. But this kind of forces a transition to a much deeper problem, I think.
What's that?
Well, because we're forcing these climbing plants to yield massively out of a tiny container footprint, we're putting immense biological pressure on that small amount of dirt.
Oh, absolutely.
In the ground, roots can just dig deeper to find nutrients or tap into a water table. Here, the container is their entire universe.
And that confinement is the core challenge of the whole system. Spiritwalker warns that in container gardening, the soil becomes your entire ecosystem.
Right.
When a plant is in the earth, It benefits from capillary action. The Earth acts like a giant sponge, pulling water up from deep underground reservoirs through these microscopic channels in the soil.
But a plastic bucket sitting on a concrete balcony is completely severed from that water table.
Completely severed.
So it's essentially an ICU for vegetables. You're 100% responsible for every drop of water and every nutrient because the Earth simply cannot do it for them.
That's a really good analogy. If your soil mix is wrong, the plant dies. The chemistry and structure of the soil must be heavily engineered to compensate for the lack of a natural ecosystem.
So what's the fix? Because I imagine cheap dirt isn't going to cut it.
No. Cheap, poor quality dirt will just compact into a brick, suffocate the roots, and dry out instantly. Spirit outlines a highly specific mix to act as the engine of the garden.
Okay, what's in the mix?
You start with a base of high-quality potting soil, but then you must mix in a generous amount of compost.
Because the compost introduces the necessary microbiome
Right.
and the slow-release nutrients.
Exactly. Then, to combat the compaction, you add perlite or coarse sand. Perlite is crucial here.
Those are those little white rocks you see in potting soil, right?
Yeah, they look like rocks, but they're actually expanded volcanic glass.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
Yeah. They hold these tiny pockets of air within the soil, providing vital aeration so the roots can breathe, while allowing excess water to drain out.
Which prevents rot.
Right. Without drainage, anaerobic bacteria just take over and rot the root system.
But okay, even with the perfect soil engine, we still have to manage the hydration. And honestly, this brings me back to my earlier pushback about the freedom of a nomadic lifestyle.
I thought you might bring that up again.
I mean, if these containers are entirely dependent on us, and they dry out faster than the ground, aren't we just tying ourselves to a watering can every single day? It sounds like a lot of work.
Well, the maintenance is higher, yes. But Spirit argues that this hyper-local control is actually what enables freedom.
How so?
You are trading automation for agency. If your plants are in the ground and a massive flood hits, or a crazy heat wave bakes the soil, you are helpless.
That's true.
But with containers, you control the thermodynamics.
Okay, walk me through how we manage those thermodynamics efficiently. How are we keeping these plants hydrated without just standing there with a hose all afternoon?
Spiritwalker provides several vital mechanisms for water retention. First, you water early in the morning.
Before it gets hot.
Right, it's purely thermodynamic. You water before the ambient air temperature rises, and the sun just evaporates all the moisture from the surface. Second, you mulch the containers.
Just laying straw or wood chips on top of the soil.
Exactly. Wood chips, dried leaves, or straw. It acts as a physical barrier, casting shade on the soil itself and trapping the moisture inside. It mimics the forest floor.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
He also advises placing trays underneath the containers to capture runoff, which allows the soil to slowly wick that water back up as it dries out during the day.
Wait, I also recall reading in the article about, clustering the plants together. How does putting the buckets close to each other help with water?
Oh, that is one of the most fascinating biological hacks. It utilizes transpiration.
Transpiration?
Yeah. When plants pull water up from their roots, they release a significant amount of it as water vapor through these tiny pores in their leaves called stomata.
Okay.
They're essentially sweating. So if you group 5 or 6 containers tightly together, that water vapor gets trapped within their overlapping leaves.
Oh, wow. So they create their own localized, humid greenhouse effect.
Exactly. They are actively sharing their moisture to create a microclimate. And if you're parked in a desert or a really harsh, arid environment, you don't just sit there and watch them wither.
Right, you take action.
You string up a shade cloth, or you physically move the containers into the shadow of your vehicle during the hottest part of the afternoon.
Because they're mobile.
Right.
Yeah.
You are completely decoupling your food production from the mercy of the broader climate.
And that concept of decoupling leads us perfectly into the final and perhaps most profound aspect of this discussion. Spiritwalker calls it the nomadic advantage.
Yes.
This isn't just about the mechanics of growing a tomato. It's a fundamental shift in how we view our relationship with the environment.
It really is, because mobility has always been an evolutionary advantage. If you look at nomadic cultures throughout history, they survived and thrived specifically because they were not anchored to a single vulnerable location.
Right. If a drought hit or resources depleted, they simply packed up and moved.
They adapted their location to the realities of the landscape, rather than trying to force the landscape to bend to their will.
And when your garden is in a container, Your food production travels with you.
Exactly. It is no longer a liability tied to a specific piece of real estate. It is a portable asset. Your garden adapts to the landscape right alongside you.
This level of ecosystem integration is a massive theme across Spiritwalker's entire philosophy.
Oh, definitely.
In fact, if you look at the Preparing for the Collapse site, which is part of the broader Nomadic Enterprises marketplace, you see this holistic approach everywhere.
You really do.
Yeah, whether it's the herbal remedies available at the Bourbon Barrel Apothecary or the tools from Nomadic Creations, the container garden is just one module in a much larger framework of self-sufficiency.
It's a completely modular approach to living. But Spiritwalker's closing reflections in the article highlight that the most important change isn't physical.
It's psychological.
Exactly. He argues that growing even a small handful of radishes or salad greens fundamentally changes your relationship with the world around you.
Let's dig into that psychology a bit, because I can hear a skeptic asking, if I am only producing 10% of my daily calories from these buckets, why go through all the trouble?
Because the value is not strictly in the caloric math. The value is in the recalibration of your awareness.
What do you mean by that?
When you're entirely responsible for a living ecosystem, you are forced to pay attention to your environment. You start tracking the angle of the sun as the seasons shift. You feel the humidity in the air. You watch the incoming weather patterns.
You're recalibrating your internal clock away from the grocery store's delivery schedule and back to the natural rhythm of the earth.
Precisely. You reclaim an ancestral memory. For generations, humans intrinsically understood how food grew.
And we've lost that.
We have.
Yeah.
In the modern era, we have outsourced that vital knowledge to massive commercial supply chains, the very chains we saw break during the March freeze.
Yeah.
Growing a container garden is how you take that memory back. It nourishes an independence that, as Spirit notes, travels well.
So to bring this all together for you listening, genuine self-reliance does not require a loan for 100 acres of prime farmland.
No, it doesn't.
It does not require a tractor. It requires a bucket, some biologically active soil, a handful of seeds, and the willingness to learn the mechanics of how life adapts.
That's really all it takes.
You can build resilience today, even if your home has 4 wheels and an engine, or sits on the 5th floor of a concrete apartment building.
It is about taking back agency from a highly centralized, fragile system.
Absolutely. Now, if you want to study the mechanics of this in much greater detail, Spiritwalker expands on all of these frameworks in his Preparing for the Collapse book series.
Highly recommend checking those out.
Yeah, for those looking to really get into these concepts, there is actually a sale running on the entire series right now. We have included a link in the episode description if you want to purchase the books and add them to your own knowledge base.
It is a comprehensive framework for anyone serious about engineering a resilient lifestyle.
It really is.
And, to close out our conversation today, I want to leave you with a final thought experiment based on everything we've covered about yield, biology, and mobility.
Okay, let's hear it.
Consider this. If you had to pack your entire life into a single vehicle tomorrow, knowing you might not have access to a grocery store for months, which single food-bearing plant would you choose to take as your traveling companion?
Wow. That is a phenomenal question.
That's a tough one, right?
Yeah, think about the nutritional density, the continuous yield, and the psychological comfort that one plant could bring. Take some time to figure out your answer. Thank you so much for joining us on Preparing for the Collapse Radio. Until next time, stay prepared, stay curious, and keep growing.